Well now, are you settled? If so, then let's do our little trick. Keep your eyes slightly open, not searching, just allowing the room to lose its sharpness. Let the darkness arrange itself without you paying it any attention, and you'll find that the longer you try to stay awake, the sooner sleep will come. Let yourself sink fully into the bed. Let it hold you in place, steady and unmoving. Breathe slowly and just stay as you are. And if you hear something quietly shifting its weight nearby, don't respond. Stillness keeps you unnoticed. Now, let's begin tonight's stories. Joe used to say the house was blessed because it was small and it was quiet and it asked for very little of them. Helen used to laugh at that. She'd say a house couldn't be blessed. A house was timber and stone and drafts that found your ankles no matter what you did. But she said it kindly, and she said it while she rocked Brendan in her arms, and Joe would watch them both as if the sight alone was food. Brendan was new to the world. He was still the size of Joe's forearm, wrapped in whatever Helen could warm by the fire. His fists opened and closed without meaning. His mouth hunted for milk. His eyes were that newborn blue-grey, unfocused, as if he was looking through you rather than at you. On the night it happened, nothing began like a story begins. It began like a night. Helen fed him, burped him, tucked him down. Joe banked the fire. They spoke in low voices about nothing worth repeating, about a neighbour's chickens, about the price of meal, about how Brendan's hair would probably darken because Joe's had. Helen checked the window before she went to bed that night because she always did. She pushed it down until it met the frame and rattled once. "That'll do," she said. "Keep the warm in." Joe kissed her forehead, awkward as always with tenderness, and he turned the lamp lower. In the dark, the house made the sounds a house makes, a settling board, a far-off creak, a faint rasp of wind against the glass that could have been a branch. Helen woke because she knew something was wrong before she knew what it was. She sat up listening, and the first thing she noticed was the silence. Not the deep silence of a place empty of life, but the wrong silence of a place that had been interrupted. She swung her feet down and crossed the room, careful not to wake Joe. She moved by habit. She moved toward the cot. The cot was empty. For a moment she stared, as if her eyes would correct themselves. Then she made a sound that wasn't a word. It came out in a sharp, raw burst. Joe jolted upright. "What is it?" Helen couldn't answer. She could only point. Her hand shook as if she was cold, though the air in the room was warm from the banked fire. Joe was on his feet. He was at the cot. He pulled the blanket back. He shoved his hand down between the mattress and the slats as if Brendan might have slipped into some hidden gap. "Brendan," Helen whispered, and she said it again louder as if the name could bring him back. Joe turned his head toward the window. The window was open, just open enough to let in a line of night air that ran across the floor and lifted the edge of Helen's nitrous. Joe crossed the room in 2 strides and pushed it down hard. The frame rattled again, louder this time, like a warning. "Oh," he said. But he wasn't asking Helen, he was asking the room. They searched the house as if the house had swallowed the child. They lifted blankets, they checked under the bed, they opened the press, they flung open the front door and stared into the yard, into the dark that held the shape of hedges in the fields beyond. Helen ran barefoot across the flags, calling Brendan's name into the night until her voice cracked. Joe ran to the road, then to the ditch, then to the gate, as if Brendan might be laying there, as if he might have crawled. Neighbours came with lamps. Men came with coats thrown over nightshirts. Women came with hair loose and faces pinched with fear. They searched the lane and the field and the edge of the wood. They searched until the first grey came into the sky. They searched again the next night, and then the next. A week passed. Helen didn't sleep properly. When she did sleep, she woke with her arms held tight to her chest, as if she had been carrying him. Joe's face changed in that week. It became sharper. His eyes stayed open too long. He began to look at people as if he didn't trust what their mouths said. On the 7th morning, Helen rose because she couldn't lie in bed any longer. She moved like someone moving underwater. She crossed the room without thinking, toward the cot, because habit was stronger than grief. Brendan was there. He lay on his back, clean, tucked as neatly as if Helen herself had done it. His eyes were open. He watched her step into the light. Helen stopped. Her knees threatened to give. She made a sound again, but this time it broke into something like a sob. Joe came running in, shirt half-buttoned, hair wild. He saw the cot and stopped so hard his heels scraped the floor. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Then Helen was at the cot, hands on Brendan, lifting him, pressing her cheek to his head. "He's back," she kept saying. "He's back. He's back." Joe touched the baby's foot, then his hand, as if checking the warmth. He looked at the window, then at the door, then at Helen. "We don't ask," Helen said. Her voice was rough. "We don't ask how it happened. He's just here, and that's all that matters." Joe stared at Brendan for a long time. Then he nodded stiffly, like a man agreeing to something he wasn't sure of. "You're right," he said. "He's here, and that's all that matters." For a while they lived as if it had been a terrible dream. Brendan fed, Brendan slept, Brendan grew. Helen tried to stop looking for signs of a second vanishing. Joe tried to stop counting the nights. But small things began. Brendan watched too much. A baby looks at you, a baby smiles and reaches, but Brendan watched the way an old person watches, as if he was learning the shape of their faces for later. At 3, he spoke early, and he spoke plainly. At 4, he stood by Helen's bed at night and stared down at her. Helen woke and met his eyes in the dark. "Brendan," she whispered. "I like watching you sleep," he said, calm as daylight. Helen sat up and pulled him close, trying to laugh it off, trying to make it sound like a child's oddness. "God love you," she said. "Come on back to bed." He went without protest. Joe heard it once. He said nothing in the moment. The next morning, as he cut bread, he said quietly, "He did it again, didn't he?" Helen's hand paused over the kettle. "It's nothing." Joe's eyes stayed on the bread. "A child doesn't say things like that," Helen said with a forced smile. "Maybe he's not our child at all." Joe looked up, and Helen regretted the words the moment they left her mouth. They didn't speak about it again. When Brendan was 6, he began to sit alone at the table after meals, long after he should have been sent outside to play. He would stare at his plate as if listening to something inside it. Helen would bring a hand to his hair, kiss his forehead. "I love you," she'd say, but she said it to keep the fear down. He'd accept it. He wouldn't lean into it. He wouldn't pull away either. One afternoon, Helen saw a mouse. It skittered near the fireplace, bold from hunger, and it paused on the edge of the light. Brendan sat at the table, hands folded neatly, eyes on the plate. Helen began to speak, some scolding line meant for a mouse. Brendan's head turned towards it. His mouth opened. Something long and wet snapped out from him and struck the mouse with a sound like a lash. The mouse vanished into his mouth. He closed his jaw and chewed. Helen stood frozen with the cup in her hand, unable to make herself move. Brendan swallowed and looked up at her. His face didn't change. His eyes held hers like a challenge. Helen set the cup down with care because her hand shook. She backed out of the room without turning her back on him. And that night, she said to Joe, "That boy in there, that's not our son." "It's been our son for 6 years, Helen," Joe said. Helen's jaw tightened. "Our son was gone for a week, Joe, and you've heard the stories." Joe couldn't deny her words, and he had no response. They both had the same feeling, whether they wanted to admit it or not. Brendan had vague memories of the cot. He remembered the soft smell of his mother's skin, the milk smell, the heat of her body. He remembered the cold that came through the window that night, like a hand. He remembered whispering. It wasn't a single voice, it was many, and it came from outside the glass, close enough to make the skin on his flesh bump. The window moved. The room filled with a darker dark, and shapes slid through. They climbed in. They weren't like people. They had long arms and long legs bent oddly. Their hands were too clever. Their faces were hidden under hoods. But now and then Brendan saw a chin like bone, a wide, ugly grin, sharp, mangled teeth. They didn't speak to him as a child. They spoke over him.
"Oh, soft,"
one said.
"And quiet,"
said another.
"Oh, he'll do just right,"
said the third, and that one sounded older. A hand wrapped him in a blanket, another hand lifted him, the room swung, and he was gone, lifted out through the window. He tried to cry, but a palm pressed over his mouth with gentle force, as if this was only a practical matter. The night rushed around him, the cold night, the dark night. He saw hedges, he saw stars, he saw the black shape of the woods. They ran. He bounced against their chests, held tight, the blanket wrapped so snug he could hardly move. He heard them laugh, softly, not with joy, but with triumph. They brought him to a place where the earth opened, a deep, dark hollow in the ground, hidden by roots and brush, a place that one might see in a nightmare. Torches burned down there, and the light turned the walls into moving shadows. They carried him down. The air changed. It smelled odd. It smelled like damp stone and smoke and something sickly sweet beneath it. They placed him on a wooden table as far as he could tell. He lay there, wide-eyed, a poor baby, all alone, as the figures gathered round him like birds around scrap. The elder stepped forward. The elder's hood fell back, and Brendan saw a face that wasn't young and wasn't old. The skin looked stretched over something harder beneath. The eyes were bright and calm.
"Hello, little child. I'm Diarnon. That's my name,"
it said, and the voice was smooth, educated, as if speaking was a craft. Baby Brendan's lip trembled. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the attention. Diarnon looked him over with the slow care of a butcher.
"Ah, yeah, strong blood. He'll be a good trade."
A smaller one, Mealach, leaned in and sniffed Brendan's hair.
"He smells of them, though,"
he said, as if them was an insult. Sorrel laughed slowly.
"He is them, you fool."
Fionra said,
He'll cry.
Diurnon's mouth lifted, not into kindness.
Let him cry. Not to worry, he won't be hurt.
Brendan didn't know what a trade was. He only knew that the room was strange, very strange, and the faces were not like any faces he'd known in his young life, and all he wanted was his mother. Diurnon turned and gestured, and something shuffled from the dark. It was small as Brendan himself, but it carried itself like an old man. It had the shape of a child, but the shape was crooked. The limbs were too buckled, too stiff. The head sat on the neck at a wrong angle. Its eyes were dark and deep, and when it looked at Brendan, there was no curiosity in it, only hunger. If Brendan happened to ever be a twin, which he wasn't, this indeed would have been the evil of the two. Diurnon pointed to the crooked child and said,
This one goes up.
Then he pointed to Brendan and said,
This one stays down here with us.
Melach said.
It won't fool them.
Diurnon said.
It will. They'll want to believe.
Sorrel asked.
Will it know what to do?
Diurnon looked at the creature.
Copy the people above. Feed, watch, learn, live the life of this child.
The creature blinked once, then it opened its mouth and smiled like a child had been taught what a smile should look like. That night, Brendan and Helen were reunited with their child after a long week's absence. Brendan grew in that place beneath the earth. Time there didn't move the way it did above. Sometimes it leapt, sometimes it dragged. Brendan measured it by hunger and by tiredness. They didn't beat him every day. They didn't need to. They watched him, they worked him, they made him carry things from one chamber to another, always watched by eyes in the dark. Sometimes they spoke to him as if he was a pet. Sometimes they spoke to him as if he was nothing. He learned their words in pieces. He learned to keep his face still. He learned not to cry because crying out only brought laughter. He saw the place beyond the hollow too. On certain nights they brought him through a passage that opened into a world that looked like his own but felt poisoned. Mist crawled low along the ground, green in the torchlight. The moon hung huge and red, too interested in them. Trees had faces in the bark, and the faces watched him pass with mouths half open, as if ready to speak or chew. Dark shapes moved between the trunks. Some walked upright, some ran on all fours. Brendan, when he could talk, once asked Diurnon, "Why did you take me?" Diurnon looked at him as if the question was childish.
Because we could. Because you were there and handy for the taking.
"I want to go home," Brendan said.
Home isn't where comfort is, child. Home is where you survive, where you grow strong.
Brendan watched everything and listened to everything. He saw where the mist thinned on certain nights. He watched where the roots made a natural arch, where two hawthorns had grown close and their branches touched like fingers. He watched the way the others hesitated around certain places, and he began to understand there were rules even for them. One night, Sorrel said, careless,
"The door is soft tonight."
Brendan heard it and kept his face blank. Later, when they forgot him for a moment, he slipped away. His heart hammered like a fist inside him. but he didn't run like a child. He moved like someone who'd learned that running made noise. He followed the mist to the place where it seemed less thick. He found the hawthorns. Their branches formed a dark shape against the red moon, like a doorway that didn't belong in a field. Brendan stepped through. The air changed. The smell changed. The red moon was gone, replaced by a brilliant pale moon of his own world. He fell onto the grass wet with ordinary rain. He lay there for a moment, not daring to breathe too loud, because he'd expected a hand to clamp on his shoulder and drag him back. No hand came. He got up. He walked because he didn't know where else to go. When he reached the edge of a road, he followed it because roads have to lead somewhere, and hours later, he saw a house. He recognized this house, not from some unnatural sense of memory from him as a child, no, but from how the creatures down in the hollow spoke about it. And if this was his house, this was where his parents lived. He reached the door and lifted his hand to knock. His fingers hovered. What if they didn't know him? What if the thing inside had become their son? He knocked anyway. Inside he heard a chair scrape. He heard a woman's voice. A man's voice followed, sharper. The door opened. Helen stood there with a lamp in her hand, light in her face. She stared. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out, as if she could sense something about this child at her door. "Ma'am," Brendan said. Helen's eyes filled, and she moved forward as if pulled. Joe stepped between them. "What is this?" he demanded. The boy's voice shook. "I'm Brendan." "Our Brendan is upstairs," Joe said. "No, Joe, this is him," Helen whispered. Joe's head snapped toward her. "Helen." Helen didn't look at Joe. She looked at the boy in front of her. Brendan said, "I remember you used to sing the same line every night. The same line because you forgot the rest. You laugh at yourself and say it again anyway." Helen's hand went to her mouth. Joe's face changed. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. All three of them heard it. Helen said softly, "Come on in." Brendan stepped inside. The house smelled of stew and soap and candlelight and the life they had lived without him. Joe shut the door slow. Upstairs, the creak came again. Helen whispered, "He's awake." Joe's hand closed around the fire poker by the hearth. Brendan said, "It knows I'm here." The light in the room seemed to shrink. The stairs seemed longer than they had any right to be. A voice came down, sweet as honey. "Da? Ma?" Helen's face tightened and she didn't answer. "Stay behind me," Joe said. "It won't come down like a child," Brendan said. The next sound was a scrape, not of feet, but of something dragging itself along the banister. Then the thing appeared at the top of the stairs. It wore Brendan's shape, like a coat, but now that Brendan stood below, the lie couldn't hold. Its face had distorted, as if the skin was too small for what sat beneath. Its smile split from temple to temple. Its eyes darkened until there was no child in them at all. It stared at Brendan.
"You."
It said, and the voice dropped, no longer pretending. Joe raised the poker. "Get back! Get back!" The thing laughed, sobbed. Helen's voice came out sharp. "Go! Get out! Leave us alone!" Brendan moved toward the back door. Helen followed him, lamp held high. Joe backed toward them, keeping the poker between himself and the stairs. The thing crawled down. It didn't walk properly. Its joints looked mangled and twisted. Its hand clamped around the banister and pulled, and its feet scraped as if the floor rejected them. Joe swung the poker. The end struck the thing's shoulder. It recoiled with a hiss that made Helen flinch. Brendan yanked the back door open. The night air poured in, cold and clean. The thing paused, and for the first time it looked uncertain. Brendan said, "It won't cross unless you force it." Joe's voice was tight. "Then we'll bloody force it." Helen stepped forward and thrust the lamp toward it. The flame flared. The thing's eyes flicked to the light, and it drew back as if it disliked the brightness. Joe struck again, harder. The thing stumbled toward the open doorway. Helen said, "Get out, out, and curse you to hell." Joe drove it with the poker like an animal. The thing reached for Helen with a clawed hand. Joe hit it across the wrist. It cried out, and the sound wasn't a child's cry. Brendan watched its face as it crossed the threshold. For a second, it looked almost angry, in a human way. Then the night swallowed it. It vanished as if it had never been there. The air inside the house seemed to release, as if the stale air went out and the new air came in. Helen sagged against the wall. Joe stared at the doorway for a long time, poker still ready. Brendan stood in the middle of the kitchen and listened. Nothing came. No whispering, no soft laughter, no feet upstairs. Helen crossed to him and put both hands on his shoulders, as if she needed the proof of him under her palms. Joe lowered the poker and looked at Brendan, as if seeing him for the first time. Joe's voice came out low. "Will it come back, I wonder?" Brendan swallowed once, and even that small movement looked careful and learned. "They'll know I left," he said. And in the quiet that followed, Helen understood that the house might be blessed, but the world beyond it just didn't care. In Irish folklore, a changeling is a fairy child left in place of a human one. The belief that held the Ishi, the hidden folk, would steal a healthy infant and replace it with one of their own. The substitute might look almost identical at first, which is why the deception could last, but as time passed, the difference would show. Changelings were said to grow oddly. They might mature too quickly in speech or seem watchful in a way that no child should be. Some were described as sickly, others sly. Many stories speak of older eyes and a young face, of strange appetites, of a coldness toward affection. The fairy child didn't truly belong in the human world, and that tension revealed itself in small, unsettling ways. The changeling myth exists partly as horror and partly as warning, about the unseen world living alongside the seen, about the thinness of boundaries, and about the terrible possibility that love alone may not be enough to recognize what has been taken and what has been given back. Tom saw it just before his boot came down on it. He stopped short and pulled his foot back. The boithrin was quiet at that hour, hedges thick and leaning in, the ground dark and damp underfoot. Things stood out there. If something didn't belong, you noticed. The comb lay in the middle of the lane. It wasn't broken, it wasn't dirty. It sat neatly, teeth up, pale against the earth, as if it had been placed rather than dropped. Tom crossed himself. He stood there a moment, then another. He didn't touch it. Mick came whistling along, hands in his pockets, and nearly walked straight into him. "What are you doing, standing around there like that?" Mick said. "Look," Tom said. Mick leaned forward. "That's a comb." He bent to pick it up. "Don't," Tom said sharply. Mick froze mid-reach and straightened slowly. Why not?" "Because that's a Banshee's comb." "Oh, is it, yeah?" "It is, and you don't ever pick them up, so you don't." Mick took a step back without thinking. What's the story? What happens if I do pick it up? It means you're marked, Tom said. Marked how? Mick replied. Some says she comes to your house at night, wailing like, knocking on the windows, wanting it back. Mick glanced down the lane behind him towards his own house. Right, I don't want any women coming knocking and screeching at me doors. That's the first time I thought I'd ever say that. They both looked down at the comb. Ger came along with the sack over his shoulder and slowed when he saw them planted there. What's going on here? Before Tom could answer, Mick said with confidence, A Banshee's comb. Ger bent slightly. Oh, you don't touch them yolks, so you don't. They leave them out as traps, I think, don't they? Yeah, actually I heard that, Mick said. Lures you into her business, Ger replied. He stepped back another pace. Nuala arrived with a basket and stopped short. What are ye lads at? Ger said. Banshee's comb. Nuala crossed herself immediately. Oh no, if you bring that inside, she'll wreck the place getting it back, Mick said. How do you mean? What, she goes around breaking the place up or what? Nuala said. In some stories she snaps the fire tongs clean in half. Tom said. Yeah, because iron's the only thing that stops her, I think. I have a fine pair of tongs back in the shed if you want me to swing back by the house. Oh, I wouldn't do that, no. A good pair of tongs like that. She might end up cursing the turf or something, Ger said. Oh, yeah, that's a good point. No, Pat arrived then and slowed. Why's everyone stopped? Before anyone else could speak, Ger said, Banshee's comb. Pat looked down. Teeth up, he said. Is that bad, is it? Warning sign. Means she's unsettled, Pat said. Of course, nobody thought to ask what teeth down meant. Eddie arrived on a bicycle and skidded to a stop. What's happening here? Pat said. Banshee's comb. Eddie leaned forward. Mick said. Don't. I wasn't going to, Eddie replied. Once you touch it, she knows your face. Someone else put in. And your people. Another man arrived, then another. Each time, the last arrival took it upon themselves to explain. Banshee's comb, Mick said proudly. Whatever you do, you never lift it, Pat said. And if you have to move it, iron only, Ger put in. And never through a door, someone else said. A window, another corrected. Voices lowered. Some said you shouldn't step over it. Someone said you shouldn't turn your back on it. Someone said you shouldn't speak loudly near it in case she thought you were mocking her. By the time guard Frank arrived, the lane was thick with people. Frank said, What's all this? 3 voices answered at once. That's a Banshee's comb, so it is there, Frank. Frank looked down at it. Right? He stood there a moment, thinking, We can't have people walking through that. 15 minutes later, he had the area completely cordoned off like a crime scene. A man arrived and stopped. Can I get through? No, Frank said. Why not? Banshee's comb here, Frank replied. The man nodded. Oh, good luck with that. And he turned around. People still came. What's going on? Mick said proudly. Banshee's comb. And you can't pass? No? Oh, actually, that makes sense, yeah. Meanwhile, a little off to the side of the lane, Tom stood answering questions from a man with a notebook and a short pencil, the local paper by the look of him. That's right, Tom said carefully. I was proceeding down the boithrin as normal, at which point I observed the item, the Banshee's comb, the man prompted, pencil hovering. Yeah, that's correct, the Banshee's comb. I did not engage or make physical contact, and I advised others not to approach for their own safety. The man nodded, wrote it down, and thanked him. Back in the crowd, someone suggested sending for a priest. Nuala said, Oh, Jesus, no, that makes it official. Everyone agreed that was worse. Bernard arrived close to midday, eating an apple, irritated. What's all this carry-on? Bernard asked. Tom explained. Bernard listened without interrupting, and then he looked down at the comb. And then he said, almost amused, "That's not a banshee's comb." A silence fell. "What do you mean it's not?" Tom replied. "Well, that's a bawneen comb," Bernard said. Someone asked, even more curious, "What's a bawneen?" Bernard finished chewing. "Bawneen's me cat. I was looking everywhere for that." Before anyone could stop him, he ducked under the rope, bent down, picked up the comb, and slipped it into his pocket. Nothing happened. No sound. No cry. No screeching woman. The lane felt ordinary again. Guard Frank cleared his throat. "Right then, that's that." People began to drift away, dignity mostly intact, and then, farther down the boithrin, a voice rang out, thrilled. "Over here, I found a leprechaun's headstone." They all rushed over, flabbergasted, each one trying to be the first to get a look in. In Irish folklore, a comb found alone on a lane, field path, or boundary is traditionally associated with the Banshee. The danger was never that every comb belonged to her, but that her combs were ordinary enough that you could never be sure. For that reason, the rules were strict. And if you should ever find yourself on an Irish boithrin, these are the rules. Never pick it up, and never bring it inside. If it had to be moved, it was done with iron, fire tongs, a poker, and returned through a window, never a door. In many stories, the iron tool was damaged or broken when the Banshee claimed it, a sign that worse would happen had bare hands been used. Whether the belief was true mattered less than the caution it enforced. But better to leave a road blocked for a while than to invite something to follow you home. I had been proud of the camera for 3 full days, which is long enough for pride to become carelessness. It sat on my work table like a small piece of America that had taken a wrong turn and somehow landed in County Clare. A Polaroid land camera, heavy in the hands, clean in its lines, and strange in the way it asked to be used. I'd seen only one once before, in the window of a shop in England on a trip that Larry still complains about paying for. The man behind the counter had treated it as if it were a fine instrument, and perhaps it was. It made pictures fast. That was the miracle of it. You pressed the shutter, you pulled the paper tab, you waited, you peeled. A moment fell out of the air and lay there in your fingers, damp and new, as if it had always been waiting to be seen. I told myself, and I told everyone, that I was going to use it for family portraits and shop work and the occasional wedding if the parish had a bride who wanted something modern. People smiled at that word, modern. They said it as if it were a hat they might try on and then put back on the shelf. The Quinns came in late in the afternoon, when the light outside had started to thin and the town had begun to think of its tea. Mr. Quinn had his Sunday suit on, even though it wasn't Sunday. Mrs. Quinn had pinned her hair with care, and her son sat between them on the chair I keep for children. He was a good boy, quiet, with the sort of face that looks serious even when he is pleased. He held his hands in his lap as if he'd been told to do so, and didn't want to disappoint anybody. They weren't rich or poor, simply a family that had decided it was time to have a picture made and framed for the mantel. Mr. Quinn said more than once that it would be a nice thing to have, a proper thing, a thing you could have and point at when visitors came and say, "There we are." I arranged them carefully. The backdrop was plain. I dislike fuss behind a face. I set the chair at the right distance and asked them to sit close, not pressed together, just close enough that they looked like one household and not 3 strangers who had arrived by accident. The boy between them was very neat. His shoes were polished and squeaked when he moved his feet. "All right," said I, "look toward me and keep still." They tried as people try, with too much effort. Mrs. Quinn held her smile like a plate she was afraid of dropping. I took the first photograph. The shutter snapped. I pulled the tab. The paper slid out with a soft, stubborn drag. I kept my eyes on the family, giving them that calm voice you learn to use when you want people to stay where you put them. Good, I said. That's it. I waited a minute. I looked at my watch. I counted under my breath. The chemistry had its own rules, and I didn't want to spoil it by impatience. The room went quiet, aside from the small sounds of their clothes and the town outside my windows. I peeled the picture. The three of them were there, exactly as I'd set them. Mr. Quinn's jaw looked strong. Mrs. Quinn's eyes looked kind. The boy looked as if he'd been asked to sit for a long time and was doing his best to be brave about it. But behind them, just above the boy's shoulder, there was a black smudge. It wasn't a shadow from the backdrop. It sat too close. It had no proper edge. It looked like a thumbprint made by somebody with dirty hands. My first thought was practical, film fault, chemical spread, or a bad pull. That's grand, I said quickly before they could lean forward. We'll just do another one to be sure. Mr. Quinn relaxed at once, grateful to be told that any flaw was the camera's and not his. Mrs. Quinn smiled again, relieved. The boy blinked and held his hands in his lap. I took the second photograph. The minute passed. I peeled. But the smudge was there again. It was less like a thumbprint this time. It had the sense of a shape, as if the blackness were trying to stand up and remember how. My fingers felt dry around the paper. I kept my face steady. People can read trouble faster than you think, and they'll carry it out into the street with them if you allow it. Third one, I said, just to have the best of it. I took the third photograph. This time, as I waited for it to develop, I felt a strange chill move across the back of my neck, as if a door had opened behind me to a colder room. It only lasted a moment. It was enough to make me glance toward the dark glass of my display cabinet. There was nothing there, only my own reflection. I peeled the third photograph. The shape behind them had become clearer. It sat behind the family like a figure in a hood, the face sunk into shadow. It didn't blur like a film error. It had weight. It belonged in the scene, which was the worst part of it. My hands went very still. The Quinns were watching me at this point, waiting for my verdict. I lifted my eyes and smiled, careful. Sometimes the first rolls are a bit temperamental, I said. This is new to me. We'll take a proper one. I'll give you the best of it. Mr. Quinn nodded, satisfied with my confidence. Mrs. Quinn said there was no rush. The boy looked at the camera as if it might bite. I took the fourth photograph. The minute passed. I peeled. The fourth picture was clean. The three of them sat as they should, with nothing behind them except the plain backdrop and the honest light. I showed them that one. Their faces softened at once. Mrs. Quinn reached out and touched the edge of the paper, careful not to smudge it. Mr. Quinn gave a small laugh, pleased, as if he'd just won something. That's us, he said. Look at that. I nodded and told them I would mount it properly and have it ready for them to collect in a few days. They thanked me and left with tidy happiness that comes from a small purchase that feels like a big decision. When they were gone, I placed the 3 spoiled photographs face down in the drawer under my counter. I told myself I'd make them look better, in better light, with a clearer head. I told myself I'd find a sensible explanation. I cleaned the lens, I wiped my hands, I closed up the studio as dusk gathered. I usually walk home, but I knew it was going to rain that night, and Larry had promised to collect me. He had promised it with the ease of a man who means it and forgets it later. I waited under the small shelter outside my door for a time, watching the road. I watched bicycles pass in a hurry. I watched a dog put its tail down and run. I watched the lamplight on the wet stones, but Larry didn't come. A bus trundled past, nearly empty, its windows glowing. It was headed out towards the quieter roads and the scattered houses beyond the town. I had no love for buses in bad weather, but I had less love for standing in the rain in my good coat. I locked the studio, tucked my bag close and hurried to the stop. The bus door opened with a sigh. The driver looked at me as if he'd seen me before, which he had. He took my fare, nodded and pulled away. Inside the bus smelled of leather and cigarettes. The seats were hard and smooth from use. The windows were streaked with rain, turning the world outside into moving grey. The Quinns, would you believe, were on the bus already, seated together on the left side, a few rows from the back. The boy sat in the middle, as he had in my studio, and the sight of him made my chest loosen a little, as if normal people doing normal things were a charm against strange thoughts. Mr. Quinn stood when he saw me. "Mrs. Reardon," he said, "you're caught in it too." "Caught?" I said, with a small laugh I didn't feel. Mrs. Quinn smiled and patted the seat across from them. "Sit with us," she said. I shook my head. "You have enough of my company for one day. I'll just sit up here with my own company." They understood, and they smiled, and I took my seat a few rows ahead on the right, turned slightly so I could see them in my peripheral vision. The bus was otherwise empty. The driver changed gear, the engine groaned, the bus rolled out of town and onto the darker roads beyond. The first stretch was ordinary, rain and hedges and the occasional house lights in the distance, the sort of ride you'd forget as soon as you stepped off. A few minutes in, the bus passed under a low railway bridge. The light dropped away for a moment, the interior lamps flickered and steadied. But in that brief dark, I thought I saw a shape behind the Quinns. It was nothing clear, only a sense of blackness where there ought to have been an empty seat. The bus emerged into the open road again, and I looked back properly, but there was nothing there. I got goosebumps on my skin, the way I didn't like it. I put my hand on the strap of my bag and forced my eyes forward. A second bridge came farther along, and the bus went under it with a small jolt, darkness, a flicker. This time I saw it more surely, a hooded shape, a few seats behind the family. It was seated upright. It had no face, I could see, only the hood and a deeper shadow beneath it. I stared, and the bus came back out into the light, and the seat was empty. For some reason I had my breath held, my fingers pressed into the leather of the seat. The rain on the windows ran in thick lines. The road ahead was a wet ribbon in the driver's lamps. The Quinns sat together, talking softly. The boy leaned his head against his mother's arm. They looked tired and safe and unaware. The bus continued. A longer dark came when the road dipped between the high banks and trees, the branches closing over the top like a roof. The interior dimmed, the windows went black with it. And there it was again, the figure, closer, only a few seats behind them now, the same hood, the same blank where the face should have been. The bus emerged into a stretch where the fields opened and the moonlight, thin as it was, returned. The seat behind the Quinns was empty again. My mouth felt dry. I ran my tongue across my lips. I told myself I was seeing patterns in shadow. I told myself it was fatigue and the odd pictures and the rain making everything look strange. The driver didn't look back once. He kept his eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel. The bus passed under another bridge, and the darkness snapped down again. The figure was closer, still, close enough that it should have been obvious in the way people might sense things, close enough that Mr. Quinn should have felt it behind him, should have turned, should have said, "Who's that?" When the light returned, nothing was there. The Quinn spoke on, calm and ordinary. I watched them with a kind of helpless fury. I wanted to shake them. I wanted to tell them to get off the bus and walk, rain or no rain. I wanted to do anything that would break the pattern. The bus rolled on. Another drop into darkness, brief and complete. This time there was nothing behind them at all, not even a suggestion. The space was clean, empty seats, rain-marked windows, ordinary night. My shoulders lowered without permission. Relief came into me, as if I'd been holding myself up for too long. Mr. Quinn glanced toward the front, caught my eye and gave a polite nod as if to say strange weather. A few minutes later the bus slowed. The Quinns stood. "That's our stop," Mr. Quinn said, cheerful again. "Thank you for your work, Mrs. Reardon. We're delighted." "Of course," I managed. Mrs. Quinn smiled. "Good night to you." The boy looked at me for a second, serious as ever, then followed his parents down the aisle. The door hissed open, wind and rain rushed in. They stepped off into the wet dark, three shapes swallowed by weather. The bus door closed, the driver pulled away. I was alone now, alone with the engine hum and the rain and my own thoughts. The road ahead narrowed, trees gathered close again, the interior dimmed as if the bus were entering a tunnel of branches. A sound came in my ear, a soft, whispering laugh. It wasn't loud. It wasn't clearly a laugh. It was the kind of sound someone might make when they're amused and wanting to keep it private. My whole body reacted before my mind caught up. I stood, stumbled down the aisle and gripped the rail near the driver. "Stop," I said. "Open the door." The driver glanced at me in the mirror, annoyed at first. He saw my face and his annoyance faded. He pulled over, the tires hissing on wet road, and the door opened. Rain hit my face like thrown water, but I didn't care. I stepped down onto the road and I ran. The bus pulled away behind me, its lights shrinking, the engine fading into the rain. I ran home on the narrow road, coat heavy, hair plastered to my head, my shoes slipping on wet ground. I ran as if being dry again would make me safe. The house lights came into view at last, warm and steady through the rain. I reached my door, fumbled the key and pushed inside. The door closed behind me. The sound of it made the world feel smaller, and I leaned my back against it for a moment, breathing hard, listening. The house was quiet in the way a lived-in house can be. The faint clink of a cup in the kitchen, the soft crackles of the fire in the sitting room. I turned my head toward the sitting room, and for a single instant I saw Larry and the children on the floor, sprawled out, covered in blood, the room torn apart. The sight hit me like a blow. A sound rose in my throat and my hand flew to my mouth. I blinked. Larry sat in his chair by the fire, whole and alive, a cup in his hand. Fiona was on the rug with her book. Owen sat cross-legged with a toy lorry, pushing it along the edge of the hearth with serious concentration. Everything was normal. Larry stood at once when he saw me. "Lizzie," he said, "are you all right?" My voice came out thin, but I said, "I'm fine." "You're soaked," he said, and came toward me. My eyes stayed on the children, as if looking away might bring the other image back. "Why didn't you come to pick me up?" I said. "I had to get the bus." "I'm sorry," Larry said. "I meant to come." He reached me, took my coat from my shoulders, and his hands were warm. The normal touch of him made me feel foolish and near tears at the same time. It was a strange night," I said, forcing a small laugh. "That's all." He studied me for a moment. "You looked like you saw something." "I didn't," I said. "Just rain and tiredness." Larry's expression shifted, as if he remembered something he meant to tell me earlier. He smiled, pleased with himself. "Oh," he said, lowering his voice, as if the children might be impressed by the secrecy. "I couldn't pick you up because I had someone calling, and I got talking." "Who?" I asked. He glanced toward the sitting room again. "Come in here," he said, and I stepped forward. A woman sat in the far chair by the fire, hands folded in her lap, posture neat. She was elderly, though not frail. Her coat lay across her knees, as if she had only just come in and might leave again at any moment. Larry said, "Lizzie, this is Mrs. Boland." The woman turned her face toward me and smiled. It was a pleasant smile, at first glance, but it held a fraction too long and it showed too much tooth. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was soft, tidy, and confident, and Larry spoke quickly, eager, saying, "She's a nanny. She came recommended. I couldn't let her go without meeting her. She seems too good to be true." Fiona looked up from her book, curious. Owen stopped his toy lorry and stared, as children will. Mrs. Boland smiled at them too. The smile stayed in place, as if it were fixed there. "Children are a blessing," she said. Larry beamed at that, as if she had complimented him personally. I stood at the edge of the room, wet and cold, and tried to make my mind behave. I told myself my fear was still clinging to me from the bus. I told myself that every stranger looks odd when you've been running in the rain. Mrs. Boland's coat was dark. Her hands were pale and clean. Her eyes didn't seem to blink as often as mine. And Larry said, "She can start next week. It could take weight off you." I heard my own voice before I was fully aware I was speaking. "Where are you from, Mrs. Boland?" "Here and there," she said, still smiling. "I go where I'm needed." That phrase landed in the room and sat there. Larry laughed lightly, saying she's modest. Mrs. Boland turned her face toward me again. "You've had a busy day," she said. I nodded. "Photographs." "Ah," she replied, as if the word pleased her. The children watched her, quieter now, as if the room had asked them to be. Larry was still talking, still eager, naming hours and pay and arrangements, and I listened and I tried to keep my eyes steady, but in my mind the 3 spoiled photographs lay face down in the drawer at my studio, the hooded figure behind the Quinlan family, the moving shape on the bus, the whispering laugh near my ear, the image when I came into my own house. Mrs. Boland rose at last. "I won't keep you," she said. "You've had enough bad weather and worry." Larry stood too, gallant, saying, "I'll walk you out." I heard myself say, polite and automatic, "Will you be all right getting home? It's heavy rain." Mrs. Boland's smile widened a bit, and she said, "A bit of rain would never hurt me." She lifted her coat and put it on, and she pulled the hood up over her hair in one smooth motion. The firelight shifted across her face and left the features deeper in shadow. For a moment, the shape of the hood was the same shape I had seen behind the Quinlans, the same hollow darkness where a face should have been. Her smile remained bright and yellow, sitting in the shadow like something alive. I couldn't find words. My body stayed in place as if the floor decided it was holding me. Mrs. Boland looked at me, still smiling, and held the look a second longer than courtesy required, and the room felt smaller again. Larry opened the front door, wind and rain rushed in, and Mrs. Boland stepped out. Larry turned to me, cheerful, unaware. "She's lovely," he said. "I have a good feeling about this one." My voice came out flat. "We can't have her." He blinked and asked, "What?" "We can't," I said again. "Not her." Larry's face hardened with confusion. "Lizzie," he said, "listen to yourself. She's kind, she's experienced. The children took to her in a minute." "No, they didn't," I said. "They watched her." He stepped closer and kissed my forehead, the way he does when he believes I'm tired and overthinking. "You've had a strange day," he said. "Dry off, get warm. You'll soon see sense." He walked back toward the sitting room to settle the children. I moved to the front window and looked out through the rain-streaked glass. Mrs. Boland went down the driveway in the dark, her hood up, her coat hanging straight. The rain fell through the light of the porch and the yard turned to black beyond it. She didn't seem to walk in the way people walk. There was no shift of weight, no careful footing on the wet ground, no hurry to escape the rain, as if she was floating. She moved as if the ground were an idea, not a thing that could resist her. And then halfway down the drive, she stopped. She looked back toward the house. The hood held her face in shadow. Her smile showed through it, bright as a small blade. It stayed there, fixed, watching, as if she were amused by something I couldn't yet understand. The porch light flickered once in the rain, and when it steadied again, she was gone into the dark, and the driveway was empty except for the water running along the edge of it. 2 days later, I learned that the Quins had been found dead in their home. The doctor placed the time of death on Tuesday. I took their photograph on Thursday. When you wake in the morning, please like, subscribe, and leave me a small comment. Tell me where you're listening from. Those quiet words and clicks are what keep this place alive. The soft signs that let the stories return again and again to you and to others. Come back every night. Let this be your resting place. Good night.